So, we've covered what Transformers are made of and how they work, but not the big one. Where did they come from in the first place? How does a race of living robots get its start? Well, there have been several answers. The earliest origin for the Cybertronian race was provided on the very first page of the very first issue of the Marvel comic back in 1984. Transformers, the grandiose narration proclaimed, had spontaneously evolved on their own as a result of, and I quote, the interaction of naturally occurring gears, levers, and pulleys. Needless to say, this origin story, which was termed a technogenesis by Dreamwave Productions Comics, has fallen by the wayside as the Transformers franchise has continued. By contrast, the animated series offered no origin for the Transformers at first, but eventually planted the seeds for its own unique creation story in 1986's The Transformers the Movie. The film introduced multiple figures that would be important in future origin stories: the monster planet Unicron and the alien Quintessons. Though early drafts for the film had intended these beings to be connected, with the Quintessons serving as Unicron's pilot fish hunting down those who survived his wrath, this idea was dropped, and subsequent episodes of the cartoon would take the characters in different directions. Unicron was established to have been created by the ancient genius Primacron and his assistant the Oracle, while the Quintessons were revealed to be the creators of the Transformer race. 12 million years ago, they had built Cybertron as a factory to mass-produce robot workers and soldiers, forging their bodies in the fires of the plasma energy chamber and programming them with the megacomputer Vector Signal. But the Quintessons failed to realize that their creations had developed sentience, and the robots rose up against them, overthrew them, banished them from Cybertron, and established their own civilization. Back in the world of comics, in 1988, British writer Simon Furman decided to craft his own origin story for the Transformer race that would supplant the natural gears and levers idea in comic continuity. Unicron was a central figure in Furman's telling, depicted as a dark god from the beginning of time who was locked in eternal battle with his brother Primus, the Lord of Light. Primus could not hope to defeat Unicron in physical combat, and so tricked him, luring his mind into a duel on the astral plane. From there, Primus fled back to the material world, and Unicron followed, right into Primus's trap. Instead of rematerializing back inside their bodies, Primus led his and Unicron's astral forms into a pair of barren asteroids, trapping them, Primus hoped, for all time. Unfortunately, it was not to be. Unicron psychically reshaped his asteroid into a metallic planet able to transform into a giant robotic form, and Primus did the same, turning his prison into Cybertron. Inspired by Unicron's transforming ability, Primus birthed a race of robots with similar abilities from the surface of his new planet body, who would take up his crusade to protect the universe against Unicron's scourge. But until they were ready to do so, Primus knew he had to hide himself and his children from Unicron, and so shut himself down, entering a slumber that would conceal his mind from Unicron's psychic reach. But, as a final act, he bestowed upon the Transformers a genetic matrix containing a portion of his power that could be used to create new Cybertronians while he slept. When Furman took over writing the American Transformers comic book the following year, he retold the story in its pages for American audiences, and in the years that followed, most fans came to regard it as their preferred origin story. This preference would have a great impact on other Transformers media. It directly led to Primus being mentioned in dialogue several times during the Beast era.
Primus help us all if that thing survived.
And ancillary media would go on to explain that sparks, the souls of Transformers, which we talked about last episode, were all fragments of Primus's own life force. Eventually, Primus appeared in animation for the first time as part of the Unicron trilogy, debuting as a disembodied spark in Transformers Energon, and then as the physical transformed body of Cybertron itself in Transformers Cybertron. Primus's appearance in the Unicron trilogy was accompanied by a greater retcon. He and Unicron, tie-in publications put forth, actually existed in every Transformers universe, meaning that, despite how it might appear, even if someone or something else laid claim to it, in some arcane form or fashion, the Primus origin story was the true origin story everywhere,
Now, the complex in-universe quantum mechanics behind this idea are about as far from the basics as you can get, and are definitely a subject for a different episode sometime in the future. All you really need to understand right now is that this led various creators to find a way to rewrite the Criação origin from the original cartoon in order to retroactively incorporate Primus into it.
The first attempt came in the 2004 Transformers Universe comic book, which explained that the Criações had not built Cybertron, but merely found and conquered it after Primus had created it, enslaving and mass-producing his creations. In 2006, Japanese media offered its own spin on the idea for its continuity, explaining that Primacron's assistant was in fact the cartoon's version of Primus, and that Vector Sigma was his sleeping form, the power of which was harnessed by the invading Criações to create Cybertron and the Transformers. And this has tended to be how Criação involvement in the Transformers' origins has been depicted ever since, as self-serving interference in Primus's grand plan. Each universe that uses the Primus origin story tends to put its own spin on it, changing and adding details each time. In some versions of the story, Primus and Unicron are presented as the last remaining members of two warring armies of gods. In others, however, Unicron was the last survivor of the previous universe, and Primus was created by the sentient core of the universe itself to combat his threat. In the version of the story told at the time of the Unicron trilogy, Primus and Unicron were explorers, created at the dawn of time to chart the newborn universe by an extra-dimensional entity known as the One, and were originally a single being who was split in two. In some versions, one or both of them don't become merged with planets until after their battle has concluded and Unicron has already been defeated, while in others, the pair have planets as their natural alternate modes, removing Primus's trickery and trapping of Unicron from the narrative. In the aligned continuity, Unicron's planet form actually becomes the Earth itself. A common element in the origin story since the time of the Unicron trilogy sees Primus achieve victory over Unicron by creating the first Transformers to help him in his fight, before entering his slumber and going on to birth the rest of the race. These 13 original Transformers have a complex history all of their own that will be the subject of another episode. But one of them, Quintus Prime, has been identified as the creator of the Criações. And round the circle goes. IDW Publishing's comic books have offered perhaps the biggest departure from the classic version of the Primus origin story. Their version is treated only as a literal creation myth recounted by religious Transformers that may or may not actually be true. In it, Primus split himself into 5 to create a new pantheon of gods called the Guiding Hand, who in turn created the Transformers, before a war between gods ultimately ended in their destruction. Primus saved himself by, as in other versions of the story, merging himself with Cybertron, while his body was reshaped to become Vector Sigma. The other members of the Guiding Hand were Mortalus, the god of death, who began the war by turning on his brothers, and whose own death served as an allegorical explanation for why Cybertronian sparks are immortal. Solomus, the god of wisdom, who in death became the Matrix. Epistemus, the god of knowledge, the source of the original brain module. And Adaptus, the god of shapes, from whom the T-Cog and the power of transformation came. So, how do the live-action movies fit into all of this? The first film simply credited the mysterious Allspark with bringing the Transformers to life. But just as the sacred life-giving objects from Generation 1, the Matrix and Vector Sigma, were retconned into being the tools through which Primus granted life, so too have other stories presented the Allspark as an instrument of Primus's will. That has yet to be part of any actual film, though. The fourth in the series, Age of Extinction, appeared instead to draw inspiration from the original cartoon, alluding to a Criação-like origin for the Transformers by crediting a mysterious race of aliens called the Creators with being their makers. And then there's The Last Knight. This film features an alien sorceress named Quintessa, who claims to be the creator of Cybertron. Now her name, of course, is a direct allusion to the Criações and that version of the origin story, but further, she identifies herself as the Prime of Life, which, together with her appearance, draws an obvious parallel with Quintus Prime. But the film takes no steps to reconcile Quintessa with either the Allspark or the creators from previous films, and the Knights of Cybertron identify her in the film as the Great Deceiver. Coupled with the film's revelation that, as in aligned continuity, Earth is Unicron in the movieverse, and the film's post-credits sequence that promises that to be the subject matter of the next movie, it seems the origin story of the movieverse Transformers is far from fully told. It's the end of June, but not the end of the basics. These first 4 episodes have covered the big questions of Transformers, the who, what, where, and how, but there's lots more to learn. In future episodes, released on a less fixed schedule, we'll be looking at other big concepts like energon and space bridges, spotlighting individual characters, and even digging into specific continuities, like next episode, when we'll explore IDW continuity and help you figure out where to start reading. Till next time!